This one was a fun episode, Mitra.
It was indeed.
The wonderful topic of letting go. So simple, but so difficult for so many of us. What was your biggest takeaway?
The one that really stayed with me was about how letting go is understanding the natural flow of life. Like we breathe in, we breathe out, we let it go. Otherwise, there won't be any life. That was what really stuck with me. How about you?
For me, is what you shared about forgiveness. I thought it was really beautiful. You offered a new perspective on how we can look at forgiveness and how we can forgive, especially in the relationships that we're most entangled in, like the relationship with a mother or with a significant other, and how we can forgive on a deeper level with them.
So, on that note, if you're someone who feels stuck processing certain emotions, or if you're someone who is dealing with anger or resentment towards someone close to you, or if you're someone who wants to learn how you can let go of things at a much deeper level, or in general, if you're a person who's curious about a new way of looking at forgiveness, this episode is for you.
What does letting go mean to you?
Letting go means to me really understanding life, that everything is in movement, everything is coming and going. And when I do not do that, I'm actually going against the natural movement of life. I'm stopping life from happening. That's what it means to me. How about you?
I'm figuring it out. But I'm learning, and I think relinquishing control is a big one. But it's not only about relinquishing control. The reason we control is because we have so many emotions that we're trying to avoid feeling, in my experience. Letting go, what I'm discovering for me is also a process of allowing myself to feel those emotions that I have spent a lot of my life avoiding, and very cleverly too. Very cleverly. Because, yeah, even spirituality, sometimes we might think that we're surrendering to that process, but in reality, it's imbued with control. Letting go of attachments and specific outcomes as well.
I know you've done some work recently. Can you tell us about it? Around letting go, by the way. I know you're always working, but specifically around letting go.
There's so much. What specific question?
I want to know what it revealed to you because it sounded like there was an opening or at least arriving at an insight. And I'm just interested to know what was your knowing, the most recent knowing about letting go.
It's really been what I just mentioned. I've gone through this process of letting go before. Last year, I went through a period where I was traveling, and during that period, there was this process of surrendering and letting go. And since this year, it shifted. I forgot. And I thought I was letting go. But really, what I realized is I was continuing my spiritual practices and they were helping me. They're no doubt helping me in a lot of ways. I was becoming more present, more aware, more focused. However, in retrospect, it was all imbued with this aspect of control, this energy of control. And I was trying to fix. It was coming from an energy of fix. It was coming from a paradigm of one, there's something wrong with me and I have to fix it. And two, I think on a more subconscious level, there's this thing inside of me that I'm terrified of. And I need to do whatever I can to avoid feeling it. For me, lately, over the last couple months, that's what I've really become aware of. And I also become aware with my spirituality comes a deeper connection to a higher power. And I believe that there is a higher power, higher intelligence that's organizing everything in this world. And if I'm letting go, what am I letting go to? It was a remembering for me that there is a higher power, there is a higher intelligence, and I can surrender to that. And that higher intelligence is, its nature is to organize and to bring to harmony, to bring things to harmony. And we see that in nature. What is the intelligence that brings an entire forest into balance and into harmony? so many different organisms, insects and fungi and trees and plants, and they're all interacting and in harmony with one another. And so, why don't I allow that intelligence to work through me and just become really aware of when I'm coming from fear versus when I'm coming from a place of love and truth? There's so much more I can say, but I'm going to pause there for now.
So I'm trying to understand what you're saying. It's interesting that you think control is about not wanting to feel your emotions internally. I experience it as when I can't, for lack of a better word, manage the energies inside of me, emotions inside of me. I want to manage things outside of me, hence control. It's almost like I am seeking balance. Like you said, everything in nature is seeking balance. I would like to arrive at balance, but I'm not. My energies inside of me are really jumbled up, entangled. So, what I do instead, I try to somehow manage things externally, which then becomes control. I want you to sit here, do that, talk like this, dress like that, and behave like this so that I can feel good. And I see it more as lack of management, commanding of the energies inside of me that translates to outer control. But you're saying that you experience it as not wanting to feel those emotions as opposed to having
It's
a
both,
say.
really.
Yeah.
It's similar, right? Because
Mhm.
not wanting to feel is actually
Yeah.
alluding to the fact that I feel like I can't manage them. If I knew how to manage the emotions, if I knew how to deal with them,
I would let
then
them in.
I, yeah,
Sure.
similar, very similar.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. My curiosity is around the energies that you talked about. Where is the fear coming for you? What do you fear if you, let's say, because I know the first thing people do when they experience something so called challenging, or some they call it negative feelings, which such a thing doesn't exist, but okay, challenging feelings, unwelcome feelings. What is the fear? Is the fear that I cannot handle it? The fear is that it's bad, I'm bad, it's bad, something is bad. What is the fear in that moment? Why can't you personally let the anger go through you, or let the resentment go through you? What gets it stuck in you?
Yeah. There's layers to fear. I consider fear of rejection a surface level thing. A layer below that is fear of certain emotions like anger. Yeah, I've realized that I have a lot of fear. There's just this belief that I feel like the anger could take over me and cause me to do really bad things, even though in this lifetime I never was in a place where anger totally took control over me.
Mhm.
I do believe that we live multiple lives, and I've had rememberings that there were lives that I've lived in the past where my anger took the better part of me, and I did some really bad things to hurt people. Some part of me is just scared that the anger will cause me to do bad things, or I won't be able to handle it. And a layer below that is fear of this thing that I can't even describe. For as long as I can remember, I've just felt this uneasiness inside of me. I don't even know what it is. And actually, one of the questions that I've been asking myself is like, what is it that I'm really scared of? At the root, am I really scared of? And I don't know what it is yet. I don't know what it is yet. I am curious to face it, but I'm not sure what it is. What I can say is that it's this generalized uneasiness that I feel in my gut and in my chest.
So my question to you, Ben, is, are you saying that you can't handle the fear if it arrives, if you let it in? You, Ben, powerful Ben, who's done all this work, cannot handle that? Is that your assumption about you and your relationship with
No,
fear?
there are no assumptions. And what I'm learning is it's alluding to what you said before, which is like learning how to manage our emotions. It's realizing that because it's not only fear, it's not that simple. There's fear
Mhm.
entangled with anger, entangled with grief, entangled with guilt, entangled with all of these things, right? And so what
Mhm.
I'm learning is that this is just a process of it's an unraveling, it's a peeling of the layers of the onion. And there's fear, for example, fear of anger. So I've peeled that layer. right? And then facing the anger and allowing the anger to be experienced through me. And I have a way of doing that's not conventional. I learned about EFT tapping, which has helped me a lot to process these things. But moving through the anger and then underneath the anger, realizing that there's grief, right? I'll give an example. I was looking at my relationship with my mother very recently. This is fresh. This happened over these last 7 days. I realized, despite all the work I've done with the relationship with my mother, there's still so much anger that I was feeling. I had anger that she didn't love me the way that I needed. And my mother was a wonderful mother. She was. It's my own personal interpretation of what happened. But I allowed myself to experience the anger. And I realized underneath the anger, once I moved through the anger, I realized, oh my God, I feel so much grief, sadness, because I felt like I had lost my mother. There was a time when I was a child when my mother she had to start working. Our family was going through difficult financial situations. I was very young, but some part of me remembers a time when mom just disappeared suddenly. She didn't disappear completely. She just had to start working and she wasn't as present as she was. And I felt this deep sadness that I felt like I lost my mom. And I allowed myself to feel the sadness. And then underneath the sadness, there was guilt. I felt so much guilt because I realized that I, at some point, chose to close my heart to my mother. I just couldn't bear with the pain. I was very young. I don't know how old I was, maybe 3, 4 years old. And I had just made the decision that I was going to close my heart to my mom. And that just was like, oh my God, when I allowed myself to feel the guilt, there was so much there. And what came out was this little boy was expressing himself, little Ben, through me. I didn't want to close my heart to you. I didn't want to. I did it because I felt like the alternative was just too much for me to bear. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I want to love you. I wanted to love you. I wanted to have my heart open to you. I just didn't know how. I didn't know how. So this guilt, this deep guilt that I felt, and then I allowed myself to feel it. And then the next step, and a lot of my process has been guided by David Hawkins' work. He has this book, this incredible book. It's called Letting Go. He says, allow yourself to feel those emotions, whatever the emotions are. Just allow yourself to feel through it totally. Not only that, but then stop resisting whatever the opposite of that emotion is, because the opposite always exists. So the opposite of guilt is self love, self compassion, and forgiveness. So allowing myself to feel that, then also allowing, not doing. There isn't doing, it's just allowing. Stop resisting love and compassion and forgiveness from coming in. It's
It's
already
already
there.
there. It's
Just
just
stop
letting.
resisting it.
Yeah. Yes.
And going through that process. And then what comes up next? There was more sadness. Then there was more sadness, more grieving that happened. And then anger came up again. And this time it was anger at God. And it's interesting because David Hawkins actually talks about this. Anger is a very common thing that happens as we release certain emotions and we feel angry at the thing that had caused us to feel the way that we did to begin with. Now that I didn't have anger towards my mom, I'm like, anger. And it's weird. It's happening on a subconscious level. I have to like really go into introspection and realize, oh my God, that's what's happening. But anger that how could you have put me in that situation? You, the creator of the universe who organizes everything. Why would you have done that to me? And going through that process and moving through that. So this is what I'm learning. It's the peeling, it's the unknotting of these emotions, and it's the peeling of the layers of this onion and being patient with the process and understanding that, we're all complex beings. I'm a complex being. I had developed very sophisticated ways of protecting myself from feeling many things. And so now it's a process of deconstructing those mechanisms just by allowing myself to feel. and I'm still in the thick of it. I'm still in it, but I'm going through it with a much greater sense of peace and acceptance with it. And yeah, creating space has been really important, Mitra. I think going through a process like this, it's really hard if we don't create space. It's not only about doing the work, I think in between just creating space for things to arise, to
Yeah.
process, integrate.
First of all, I'm fascinated by the fact how layered
Yeah.
emotions are. It's almost like you merry go around. You just go and you come back and you end up in the same place and then you go and fascinating, really fascinating. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I heard you and that was very wonderful of you to share that. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for
Mhm.
trusting and sharing, but also tell you as much as I'm much older than you, I too, in the past few weeks, have done some mother
Mm.
work, which is very
Yeah.
interesting. I was planning as to take my mom, she's in her 90s, on a trip. She hasn't traveled since COVID, so I tried to just give her a new experience because I'm not sure how many more she will have. So I was going and I realized that there is a bit of, you said you closed your heart to your mom. Maybe mine wasn't that extreme, but there is a bit of a sharpness, like it wasn't a creamy relationship, even though on the surface, if you ever saw me with my mom, and you have, I'm very caring. I take care of her needs. I'm basically her main caregiver and manager of her life because she's legally blind. And it was really fascinating that I noticed that after all these years and all this work that I have done. And I asked myself, how can I remove that before I take her on a trip? Because it would be a lot of time that we would be together in a closed space. And one early morning, as I was meditating, something fascinating arrived. I realized that there is, beyond perhaps the memory of this lifetime, that I am holding grudges against her. I have no idea what relationships we had. I was quite aware of this lifetime, and I thought, as you said, I'd had done the work because I've been at it for almost 50 years. But as far as I remember, I've been working on this. But it was very fascinating that it was still there. Anyways, this forgiveness craving, I think it's the best name I can have for it, arrived at my awareness. This is 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm alone. I'm just meditating. And it became something very interesting because usually in the forgiveness world, you seek forgiveness. So I was giving forgiveness first. I was forgiving her. I was asking for forgiveness. And the third aspect was that I was forgiving myself for having had this experience. And perhaps even, I don't know why, but maybe that this far I haven't done anything about it. Because that's the first thing. We're so programmed to feel guilty. Oh, you haven't done it
Mhm.
yet? So do you know
Mhm.
how old you are? So I forgave my mom. I was seeking her forgiveness. And then I was forgiving myself. So that was one aspect of it that was a little bit different. The second aspect, I added to the forgiveness practice the fact that a lot of our hurt and harm is done without knowing. I just don't know that way I looked at you, the word I used, that action I took. I'm not aware because if you ask most people, would they intentionally harm anyone? They will not do it. I remember my teacher used to say, if you bring a cat and say, cut the head of this cat, almost no one can do it. But yet we can destroy each other on a daily basis with our words, with our actions, with our lack of action and lack of words, and so on and so forth. So I added intentionally or unintentionally. If I have harmed you, if you have harmed me, intentionally or unintentionally. But the third aspect that was different was that I added in this lifetime and any other lifetimes, just in case this was a longer memory beyond this physical existence that I'm experiencing on earth this time. And I just repeated it and I was crying, and it was very somatic kind
Mm.
of experience as well as emotional. I was hailing, I was moving. And if I tell you what happened, words usually fail us when we express an energetic experience because it's like love. I love pizza and then I love my daughter And then I love humanity. So it's like very confusing, the words, but I really felt lighter. I got up from that meditation, which apparently took one and a
Wow.
half hours. To me, it was like a few minutes, but then I looked at the time and by then was 6:30 and I had started around 5 a.m. I felt lighter, but that's not the most important part. That edginess was completely removed. I realized, and throughout the trip and since then, I realized that there is something very round and very gentle. Even objections, even questions that may be charged, but there is kindness in there when I interact with my mother. And funny enough, of course, that invited the very, oh, this is just so simple, the very behavior that I always yearned from my mother somehow arrived again.
Organically, just without asking for it, without doing anything. Yeah.
Exactly. But ask me a question and I can't answer this question. The question is, was it there and I wasn't seeing
Mm.
it? Or did it arrive because I wasn't
Mm.
edgy? I don't know, and I will
Maybe
never
some
know.
part of you was resisting it. Maybe that whole concept of stop
Yes.
resisting, just allow, and then it'll
Yeah.
come through.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. It's so interesting hearing this from you. When you were explaining it, my hairs stood up because you've done a lot of work on forgiveness. A lot. You used to teach workshops on forgiveness and the
Yes.
whole Ho'oponopono
I
practice.
still do.
Yeah. Oh, you still
Yes.
do. And that this time, it just resonated in a way that you've never experienced is so interesting to me, and it seems like this whole piece about this lifetime and other lifetimes was a key piece this time. Would you agree?
Yeah. I do. I do. That was that. And also, forgiveness, I have to say, is done at different levels of consciousness. So when you and I forgive each other, okay, so it may translate at certain level of my consciousness, it may translate to that, oh, I won't be reactive to you anymore. Or it may be that I would be a little bit nice to you. Or it could go at different levels of consciousness. Forgiveness means and translates into different things. So, at the highest level of consciousness, that means any obstacles between two human beings is removed. Now I'm open to receiving and giving anything. You can say anything. You can make fun of me. We will both laugh. And to some degree, if you've experienced, you and I somehow have that relationship. Not perfectly, but we do. I'm not sensitive. You're not sensitive. I could say, don't say this, don't do that. What is this you're doing? You can say the same thing. And there's very little, oh, don't talk to me like that kind of experience. So that means in a natural world, in an organic and healthy world, that truly is or can be every human experience. There all these obstacles that come that I translate and interpret, and my ego is upset and this, and how come you didn't do this? You didn't say hello first. I said hello first. Look, all of these transactional interpretation and analysis comes because there is something stuck. As I said, memory of this lifetime from some life, other lifetime, or even maybe you remind me of somebody that I haven't resolved this with. But when it's not there, it's just smooth, it's creamy, it's flowy, it's just so
Yeah.
simple.
And it's forgiveness is such a fascinating thing. It seems so simple, and
Mm,
I guess it is, but
mm.
it seems so hard for people in general to forgive. I had a friend recently text me because she knows I do a lot of inner work. She's been, I'm trying to forgive my father. How do I do that? I don't know. I referred her to a definition that David Hawkins gives for what forgiveness is. That's what's fascinating to me is on one level it seems so simple, right? But on the other level, it's not. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on this too, is it seems like one key element of forgiveness is taking full responsibility for our whole inner experience, for our life and everything that has happened to us. Like truly on a deep level, being responsible. And I think just based on what I've been experiencing lately, another key element of forgiveness is allowing us to feel whatever it is that we may consciously or subconsciously be resenting that person for.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
maybe it's about forgiving ourselves. Maybe at the end of the
Mhm.
day.
Mm.
So I'm curious to hear your perspective on why is forgiveness so challenging for people?
I feel that we don't understand why these things even happen in the first place. We forget that there are agreements, for the lack of better word, that we have when we arrive here that allows us to experience. It's called University of Earth, as far as I'm concerned. This is a university that I arrive at, and I'm here to learn and grow. Okay. For that, I have some agreements. That agreement says this person has agreed to be my mother, act as that role, in that role. This person has agreed to be my father, and so on and so forth. Part of the agreement is that they will do whatever is necessary for me to really learn all my lessons and leave as a very good graduate of this university. But when I forget that agreement, when I don't pay attention to that, and I see this as a judgmental kind of experience that they're bad and they're not good and they didn't give it to me and I wanted it, I forgot the only thing they're here to give me is the experience so that I can unfold myself. That's the only reason this person became my mother, that person became my lover, and you became my friend, and my neighbor is my neighbor. That's the only reason. They are all there for me to assist me graduate at the highest level possible in this experience on
Okay,
earth.
so yeah, I understand. That's a paradigm shift. It's rather than it happened
Yes.
to me, it's a paradigm of it's happening for me so that I can learn. Not only is it happening for me, I wanted this. Before I came into this life, I hired all the actors. We came to agreement. You are
Yes.
going to be my arch enemy. You are going to make my life so difficult. And I want you to so I can learn these lessons. Okay, let's go. And we come into this
Yes. Yes.
life to do that. So there's the paradigm shift. Okay, so the paradigm shift happens, and then it's okay, the actual process of forgiveness with that new
Mhm.
paradigm, that understanding, because the forgiveness
Yes.
hasn't happened yet. I understand,
No.
okay, my mother, my
No.
father, they're one of my biggest teachers, but I haven't forgiven
Yes.
them yet. So the
Yes.
process of forgiveness, what does it take? Where do people get stuck?
They think that it only people changed and became better, they wouldn't have to have this experience. What, in my view, if it was me, I wouldn't be understanding if I felt that way, is that so where would the lesson come from? Where would the lesson or lessons come from if everything is smooth and everybody's exactly as I want them and everything is going and eventually in a higher realm we will have that lifetime, by the way. As I'm explaining, I realize I'm defining the maybe fifth and sixth and seventh dimensional living, but right now I am in the third dimension. I am here on earth. I have a very dense physicality and I need to work with that and I need to understand that. So lack of forgiveness comes from the fact that I think we're horrible and you did this to me and you were against me. And I forget that there is a gift here in the middle of all this for me. So the best way, and you haven't had any children, the best way for me that the visual that comes to me is that when my child is sick when they were younger, I had to force them to take some medication because their fever was high and I had to put them in the bathtub, everything they didn't want to do. Okay. They didn't realize in that moment that it was for their own good. They're seeing in that moment this horrible mother that is forcing them middle of the night to do something that they don't want to do, right? But the question is, and this is symbolic, when they wake up in the morning, I would hold them and I say, I'm so sorry I did this last night. You were sick. And I'm hoping that they would know. In a way, it is probably what universe wants us to do and wants to do with us. That holds us and say, I'm very sorry. I know it was a rough day. I know it was a rough experience. It was for your own good. You were burning in fever of anxiety, of depression, of judgment, of animosity. I can go on and name all the experiences that human beings have. And I had to help you to get out of it. It's just that moment of understanding that what's in it for me at a higher level that allows us to really go to the place of forgiveness and see forgiveness as a tool for us. It was for my growth. As much as I would love to sound like I did it for my mother, I really did it for me because I was stuck. And my promise to myself is that I would like to leave this physical experience as clearly as possible. I want to clarify these relationships and clean and remove these things that I have with people as much as I can, whoever they are in my life, from my mother to, I don't know, my neighbor.
Mm. What was coming to me as I heard you describing that was oftentimes we might not even know why we really resent. Parents is the most, I think, complex and complicated relationship. We know that there's things that have happened that we can't quite describe, but when it's a vague kind of resentment that we carry towards them, and we don't really know what are the experiences that created that resentment, it can be harder to forgive. I imagine hearing you describing that made me realize this for myself that, okay, if I remembered like, oh, there was that time when she did this and that, and I'm still holding anger unconsciously towards her for that. Now, as the adult self, I can look at that situation and reframe it and be like, no, she was doing it for me. I forgive her. And so I think what's coming to me is part of the process of forgiveness, especially with more deep seated relationships like parents or siblings. It's also going into self inquiry and self awareness about what is it actually that we are resenting them for. Oftentimes, we don't really know what it is. We just know we resent them. Do you agree?
I do agree. And you're right. We don't know because the memories are dense right now, and that everything is on top of each other. And if you say it out loud, it will sound ridiculous to most people. But it is the really emotions and feelings that we have experienced that we are really resenting them for. And the way I see it, it was like universe is the best matchmaker ever, meticulous matchmaker. So your mother, my mother, wanted to experience to do that dance, and I wanted to experience watching that dance being done to me. So hence the universe brought us together. They got something out of it, we got something out of it. But when we're not in awareness, when we are in the blame zone, when we are basically in fear land, in survival state, then we are always looking for who to blame. So in the survival realm, I'm asking whose fault it is. In the thrival realm, I'm asking how can I learn and grow through
Yeah.
this? So we answer completely different questions. I'm always looking, whenever I'm looking for who did it, let me see whose fault. Who can I blame? Who can I punish and admonish? That means I'm in Fearland. It doesn't mean, of course, that we do not sometimes need to do that if you're part of a legal system. There are things that are done in a wrong way, and there needs to be consequences to that. But I'm talking at very personal and energetic level, of course, because I just realized I was an adjudicator, so my legal experience came. Of course, you need to find out whose fault it is. But we're talking about a different level and different level of awareness and different level of resolving instead of winning the case.
This was a great conversation. Learned about letting go. We discussed about letting go and talked about our learnings of letting go and the role of forgiveness. And I'd like to actually close this off with a definition from David Hawkins of what he defines forgiveness as. Okay. David Hawkins defines forgiveness as an essential process of releasing negative emotions and attachments to past grievances. He emphasizes that true forgiveness is not about excusing or condoning the actions of others. Instead, it is about letting go of the emotional burdens, such as anger, resentment, and judgment, that we carry as a result of those actions. By doing so, we free ourselves from the pain associated with these emotions and elevate our level of consciousness.
That was great.
All right, Mitra, thank you.
Good to be in conversation with you, Ben,
Always.
always.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. For a list of the links and other resources referenced in this episode, check out the podcast description.
If you're benefiting from our podcast, we'd love if you could help us reach more people by subscribing. Your support means the world to us. From our hearts to yours, we thank you.